to Spottable AF, the podcast that doesn't do corporate fluff, filters, or nice. Just real talk with the folks reshaping the world of work. My name's Kate Ball. I'm an international talent strategist, the author of the Culture Chronicles, and founder of Sparkle and SAS Consulting. I've spent the last couple of decades working in some of the world's biggest corporations, surviving the buzzwords, dodging the BS, and watching the same tired strategies get recycled with a shiny new name. That's why, in partnership with WeCP, I've launched Spottable AF to cut through the corporate fluff and shine a spotlight on the bold voices rewriting the rules of work. This is where we ditch the performative progress and have real conversations with the rebels, the renegades, and the revolutionaries who are changing how we hire, lead, and grow. Today's episode is titled From Tactical to Transformational, Redefining Talent Acquisition. And I'm joined by none other than Elaine Orler, a luminary in the talent acquisition field. With over 2 decades of experience, Elaine has been at the forefront of revolutionizing recruitment, strategic and technology. She's also, as the founder of Talent Function and the co-founder of Talent Board, been instrumental in elevating the candidate experience and pushing boundaries of traditional hiring practices. Now serving as the Chief Strategy and Product Officer of Match2, Elaine is leveraging AI to transform career sites and introduce personalized experiences, ensuring that job seekers find their perfect match seamlessly. So if you're ready to move past the mundane and embrace a transformative approach to talent acquisition, plug in and join us for a conversation that's as enlightening as it is empowering. So hi, Elaine. Thanks for being with us today.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited to be here. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I know you are extremely busy, so we'll dive right in and get down to it. But basically, obviously, I just gave an oversight of your career experience taken from your LinkedIn profile. But is there anything that I didn't cover that you'd like to share to provide more context before we dive in?
Well, I think there's only 2 things that usually aren't on my preview, but the fact that I started as a kindergarten teacher in my first career, and there are transferable skills from doing that to recruiting engineers, I found out in my early stage of my career. And then I'll also say that I really started my career when I was 6. So I'm really only in my early 20s. So don't let anybody fool you if they've said I've been around longer than that.
I love it. Okay, awesome. So obviously, as I said with the title, we're talking about moving away from a transactional environment. Recruiting to the rudimentary sense is a job is open, we need to fill it. Now, what do we do? And what I really love about your background and what you're doing at the moment is how you're incorporating more strategy into how we approach this entire life cycle of recruiting. So, in your opinion, based on what you've seen outside of your current role, what do you think needs to change? What are organizations doing that is a little bit outdated and there's so many better ways to approach?
Well, I'm confident in what I'm going to say is going to offend somebody, and it's not meant to, but I really think that there's still a dynamic change that needs to happen in talent acquisition, and that is evolving away from HR and thinking more strategically like sales and marketing, because our real function and our real role is that sales and marketing. It's that identifying future talent and bringing them in through relationships to the organization, and then closing that talent through that engagement of the hire. And the more that we think strategically about that, the more that we leverage tools and thought processes that focus much more like marketing and sales do, and less administrative like payroll and comp and benefits. Again, not trying to offend anybody, but there is a strategic difference between what happens in finance and what happens in sales. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to continue to evolve that direction and to be more strategic in that angle and that line of thinking.
And so to play devil's advocate, not everybody understands because they don't have that experience or they don't have that context yet. So can you provide an example of what it looks like when recruiting really is a strategic business partner?
Absolutely. And I think that it comes down to the difference of being told, go find me somebody, and being asked, help me identify the right person. And I think those are the two different ways we get approached in recruiting. It's the manager of the business or IT or the system saying, here's the job, here's the rec, go do your job. Or it's the business coming to say, hey, help me understand what's best in the market. How can we leverage what our needs are and really identify the talent that's going to fill those gaps and help us grow? And it's a completely different conversation that you have on a day in and day out basis. And I know that there are so many organizations today that don't get to have that conversation, that are still in the side of receive the order, go fulfill. And there's so many opportunities for us to change that conversation and so many different ways that we can lean backwards into the business and say we're much more intelligent at our craft. And it really is a craft. And I think that gets missed quite a bit. It's assumed it's a job, but we have an art and a science to what we deliver in talent acquisition and recruiting today, that we just need to flex that muscle even more whenever we can.
And I love what you're saying because it speaks to me after 2 decades in recruiting. It's that move away from being a service provider to being a true business partner. But for those in businesses where this isn't the norm, are there certain steps or recommendations you can provide that will help them move away from that more transactional role and really become that trusted advisor?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some basics, some table stakes that I think that any recruiter can do on any engagement, or to start to move that narrative with the managers or with the business. And it starts at the touch points that are critical to those managers. It starts with the job that they're asking to fill. Does the recruiter have intelligence around the last time they filled that job? Do they have intelligence around what the market is available? Is the manager asking for something realistic, or are they asking for the purple unicorn? So having that confidence to have that early conversation with the manager or with the business team to say, what you're asking for doesn't exist, but here's what does, and here's how we can recreate the right solution for you. But it comes from a confidence level of knowing our craft and being willing to put it out there. And then the second one is really at the point of decisioning at interview. And, when it comes to it's standing up and being a voice for the candidates you think are the strongest for the business need, not necessarily the most liked by those that are interviewed. It's not a like category. It is a who can actually perform this job the best for the business success. And so being able to have a voice in that decision process as well. And just having that confidence to step in. I'd rather be told sit down than why aren't you standing up? So it's just a mindset and a mind shift that I think anybody can start to approach from that angle. So.
Awesome. And let's talk about candidate experience as a strategy, because this is something that I think obviously the world of work evolves, but I can't help but think has gotten lost, particularly in the last maybe 4 or 5 years. So how do you define what a great candidate experience is? And why do you think so many companies still get it wrong?
Oh, such great questions. And it was, those are the questions that were asked in 2009 when I was approached to start and to found the Talent Board and the Candidate Experience Awards. And it was, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to change this industry? And my regretful first question was, why me? To the answer being, why not? And I was like, oh my gosh, then it has to be. So founding that organization is one of the pivotal moments in my career. And really the focus was on shining a light on organizations that are doing it right, that where the candidates are demonstrating back to the organization through surveys that they felt that they were respected in the process, And then we would only shine the light on positive experiences with those companies and not disclose those that didn't win. And I think that there's still an opportunity in the market today for organizations to take the basic steps to improving their candidate experience. And I think where that comes from is treating candidates with respect, and it's all candidates. And I'm not saying every candidate needs a phone call. There are other people that will say that. Other people that will say they all need a personalized message, and I disagree. I think that the stage that the candidate is in with the organization should be an equal response stage. If the candidate has applied and received their thank you email, and that's the stage that they're at, an email response is fine. If they've gone to a phone screen, a phone response. If they've gone to an interview, a personalized message response. But I think that we can build on these relationships to give candidates back what they want. And I think the only other thing is we need to remember with candidates, we need to have a lot of compassion, because a lot of times this is what they're doing all day long. And imagine how difficult it might be to search and apply to jobs on your own career site, let alone that they've done that with 10 and 15 other companies for the last couple of hours. So there's an exhaustion factor and a desperation factor that we just need to be compassionate about. And so those candidates are reaching out, finding ways to better communicate or giving them hope, to redirecting them to different things that can help them with their resume, or ways in which that they can be encouraged through their job search. But the what is it called? What we used to call it, the black hole of death, maybe what it was, where resumes go to die, was what we called our ATSs at the time. There's so much opportunity to build relationships out of the content that's in there, that we just need a few minutes every week to think about what's one thing we can do better, and how do we implement that one thing the next week. And if we just continue to approach things that way, we're going to see a better experience overall.
And let's face it, the invent of AI is both a blessing and a curse to candidate experience, in my opinion, because it allows for that streamline, that efficiency that's incredibly tempting, but it does remove, to a certain extent, that personal connection, that emotional intelligence piece. So what advice would you have for companies who are currently approaching the incorporation of AI into their recruitment strategies, to ensure that they're not negatively impacting the candidate experience by introducing these tools?
It's great question. And I have a story. I will just say, a relative of mine who is currently unemployed, who just lost their job, who's in their career search. And I said, please blog on your whole experience, because this relative has been in the industry in the talent acquisition side before and stepped out into an IT role. And part of their experience has just been, I respond to the job I think I'm a fit for. There's 7 jobs and I have no idea which one I'm the best match for. So I apply to all of them. So there's that experience that we need to change. And that's something we're focused on at Natch too. But the other side of the equation is, what actual other things are we doing with AI in the process? And a great example is they were contacted via an AI bot through text to schedule an AI bot phone screen. And so it was completely done with the machine. There was no human involved. The questions she asked back of the bot couldn't answer them. It kept repeating itself. It kept asking the same questions twice. So my point on all of this being, if we're going to use the technology, we should really, really make sure it works. We need to make sure that it's actually functioning the way it's supposed to, that it's creating a better experience. I'm not saying don't use AI for screening. We should, because there are certain things that are repetitive that we can ask questions like that for. But we as an industry need to make sure that the technology that we're implementing is also implementing it in such a way that is a positive experience overall. So that's just one. I've seen AI being introduced in interview scheduling as a great expediter of those tasks, in such a way that's facilitating a better experience. I've seen AI working in interviewing, where it's recording or recording your visual responses to the interview and doing some summations for the interviewer and the interviewee. So it's in everything that we're using in any way, shape, or form. But I'll just bring it back to it's the how would you want to be treated? If you were on the other side of this screen with this person, with this machine, with this conversation, how would you expect to be treated? And if you're building with that in mind, you're set up for success. Because if you're building for the lowest common denominator, you're not going to create an experience that people want to return. When you need that talent, they're not going to be interested.
Yeah. And great points there, 100%. Before we started recording, we talked very briefly about the current market and the changes that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years. And obviously, you just mentioned with your relative. But we're seeing higher than ever numbers of layoffs and things like that. Let's talk about how to approach candidate experience as a strategy, because one of my biggest concerns and what I've been very vocal about myself in the last few years is all of those companies out there not treating people particularly well right now, laying off employees without notice, or forcing them back to work against not back to work but back to office against their will. All of these things are compounding a very negative employer brand. And though it's an employer-led market right now, we all know this pendulum is going to swing back eventually. And so how companies are approaching that experience piece, both for recruiting, but also they're already hired and working employees, is no doubt going to have some impact on how they differentiate themselves as an employer of choice in the future. So what kind of guidance or what are you seeing from a strategic perspective to really safeguard businesses in this market?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different levels and models to that as well. So there are certain brands that are going to achieve what they need to achieve just because of their brand. And people will, I hate to say it this way, but it's so true, will suffer through the experience because of the brand behind it or the name behind it. I think that will only get them so far. I think that we're seeing much more of this talent community world where we're going to go back to relationships, and it's going to be, well, wait a minute, I was treated really poorly during that recruiting process. I got this other job and it's great. I'm going to bring all my friends with me. So I'm no longer, so as we think about people gravitating towards roles that are in giving them the opportunity to grow and experience success, they're going to gravitate towards those opportunities. Again, some of the brands are still going to hold on to the fact that because of their brand, they're going to get the masses, but I wouldn't necessarily say they're going to get the best of the best. And I think that that is just something we need to really think about in talent acquisition on a regular basis. We get overwhelmed. What I think statistically I'm hearing, it's 200 applicants per job now, or up to 250 applicants per job on certain organizations. And how do you treat the other 249 if you only hire one? And again, I'm not saying that all of them need personalized, individualized, personal calls, but we have so many tools in front of us to be more proactive in the communication. You have tools that will help you write better messages. You have opportunities to give candidates, to redirect them to other opportunities in your organization or to other companies. We can share. There's so many different things that we get limited by or overwhelmed by the volume. And in fact, again, I just go back to take the step back and what's one thing you can solve every week, and what can you do next week to make that solution happen. And if we just start with those baby steps on a continual basis, we're going to see a positive experience. But the senior leadership has to care. And if the senior leadership in the business doesn't care, I'd be personally in my lifetime, I'd be polishing my resume and looking myself. So there has to be a factor at the top that just says that this is critical to the way in which we're going to operate as a business, that compassion comes through.
And you make a very good point about the senior leadership, because not everybody listening to this will work with an Amazon or a Google or a Microsoft where they've got those multi-levels. A lot of people will be in standalone roles reporting to family-owned businesses or a much smaller leadership team. What advice can you give those individuals in terms of how they make senior leaders care, how they influence upwards?
Right. Well, anybody that's a consumer facing, it's super easy because you take every candidate as a customer. And as soon as you start talking in that language, candidates as customers, in whether it's a purchasing power or referral power or a influencing power, those numbers of people that you interact with become really valuable to the business and important to retain. When you go to a B2B model, it becomes influencer, it becomes referrer. So when you're thinking about the people that you're hiring, how many are like them that are going to want to work for you as well? Or how many of them are you displacing? I think about organizations where there are only 100 people that can be that rocket scientist, right? There's only 100 of them out there, and you displaced 99 of them with how you treated them. Well, you're going to have a really tough time building that next rocket ship, as an example. So it's in pockets, and it's in specific categories and groups that become more valuable that you can position to the organization. But at the end of the day, the entire experience matters, whether it is a Glassdoor review or a rating somewhere else, or Lord forbid, a TikTok video about how bad it was, and those kinds of things that exist. It's brand and reputation to the business that matters.
And one of the things, and I'm going back early in my career now, first time I went in-house, I did 10 years agency, 10 years in-house. And pipelining and building your succession plan was a huge thing then. I think it still should be, but I also know from my peers still working in recruiting that they are so overwhelmed with the volume of candidates they're receiving that actually I think they're throwing away a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
Not necessarily intentionally, it's just missed opportunity. So from a strategic standpoint, what advice would you have to people who are overwhelmed with candidates right now, but that's not to say that they're not the right candidates? And what can they be doing to maintain relationships with those individuals to the point that the market will flip and they may actually need to return to them?
Yeah, there's so many tools. Again, if it's new to anybody in our space, if they're new to recruiting, or they're a small team of 1 or 5, and they don't have all of the technology tools in front of them that everybody else might, they might think that everyone else has more toys than they do. I think that it's going back to the marketing team and saying, what do you do? Because that's really whatever they're doing from a marketing. And I read a really amazing article the other day about just the strategies around marketing and the bigger picture pieces. And all I could do was correlate every word they said in marketing to recruitment marketing. And it was like everything we should be doing. And I think that the more that we lean into what these other professions do, the stronger our profession becomes. And so again, if it's I need to cultivate longer term relationships with candidates and I don't have a database to do it, how's marketing doing it now? And maybe there's a product that they have that you can borrow from, or another way in which you can use AI to help support that kind of relationship. For organizations that are bigger, that have all of the toys and probably more than they need, and probably 3 and 4 of the same toy, but by different manufacturers, it really becomes a consolidation question: is where do you want this information to be stored? How do you want to interact with it going forward? And how can you make it personalized as you make those interactions happen? And some of that can be staged. AI, again, is really supportive of doing the transactions, the reminders, the messaging. You can build the sequence of messaging to happen so that if they answer to 1, you can answer to 2, where it's personalized to the candidate, but you've pre-built these funnels for communication. But it takes some time and energy to do the building on those pieces. And then when it comes to direct communications, you've got generative AI to help you write the message. I mean, it's I don't have to write that thanks but no thanks message. by myself anymore. I can now add prompts that gives it a much more personalized tone. That was what I meant in the sentiment, but in a way that is professional and valuable to the candidate that I probably wouldn't have written by myself. In fact, I don't write performance reviews anymore by myself because they sound so much better when they're prompted from a solution that can help me write.
Yeah, I remember, obviously, I have an English accent. And when I first started working in the US, I was continually criticized for my communication style in writing because I got to the point too quickly. And then in trying to address that, I became much more flowery. And then I was criticized that I didn't get to the point quickly enough. And therefore, people didn't want to read these massive kind of novels that I was sending. And so to someone like myself, the introduction of AI is invaluable because it does kind of soften those edges, shall we say. It gets to the point, but does so in a way that seems far more eloquent than I ever could. But with that in mind, one of the things that I've been hearing more and more is that kind of doom and gloom. The robots are coming. They're going to take all our jobs. We're all going to be out of a job in 15, 20 years, if not sooner. And so this entire kind of concept of future proofing your career has become a more prevalent conversation among the circles, at least that I'm interacting with in HR. What kind of advice do you have, and what is your response to this mentality that we're all going to be out of a job, everything's going to be automated and streamlined and so on?
I honestly believe for certain jobs that's true because automation can do the transactions. And so if your job all day is to do transactions, to move a piece of paper from the right to the left, and that's what you consider your responsibility to do, and there is a robot that can move a piece of paper from right to left, and it has no strategic inherent value to the organization, then yes, there's technology that's going to take over those kinds of tasks. But I do think we have an opportunity to upskill fast on what we're doing, leveraging that technology to be more successful, to free up space to be more creative. Because you can ask AI to be creative and it'll give you a bunch of crazy ideas. But in order to understand the essence of where you are, what you're doing, what your passions are, what your organization direction is, you need to have the space to be creative on behalf of the organization. And that creativity is going to give you more opportunities to do things that would have been better or different or higher value than moving papers from right to left. And so I think we've got to embrace the fact that it is going to change. It is changing. It has changed, and that we need to move forward with it. And it takes me all the way back to, this is late 90s in one of my first careers in a recruiter role, and then in a recruiting technology role. And we had recruiters that we called recruiters because they were the people facers. And then we had recruiters that did the technology because they knew how to do all the resumes in the system. And so we had to pair them up with pairs. So the recruiters that would rather have a conversation than touch the technology had a coordinator that touched the technology for them. So they were a parallel team. The recruiters that did the technology had a coordinator that did all their phone calls. And so, but when you think about it, that's what we had available to us before we had this level of technology today. And so now we don't need two people to do that. You use the technology to facilitate your gaps and to improve the way you perform, not take over the way you perform.
Yeah. No, great analogy. And God, I'm dating myself here, but I remember when I first started in recruiting, we didn't even have a computer in the office. I had a phone book, a Rolodex, and a stack of paper. And having that first computer, having the internet for the first time was daunting. It was scary, but then I discovered how it could make us better. And then I remember the first AS or ATS system that I worked with and how that completely changed the game. So I'm a big proponent of AI and the value it brings. I don't think it's ever going to eradicate the need for emotional and human intelligence. And like you said, with the creativity, when I'm trying to come up with my book titles, I've tried to use like the chat GPTs, and I've tried as many as possible. And they're only as good as the information they already have. So every recommendation that I liked when I proof checked them was already a book that existed. It had just gone into an archive and recommended something to me that already existed somewhere else.
Right.
That creativity is extremely limited to an extent as well. But aside from AI, what kind of skills do you think the HR leaders of tomorrow need that perhaps they don't have right now, or they need to hone in order to be successful in the future?
Couple of things. Curiosity. So we can't get into our own silo. We've got to be curious about what's happening with the rest of the business for sure. The other skill, I think the muscle that we don't flex enough is confidence. That we are a contributor to the organization. I mean, the company wouldn't survive without the people that know how to bring in people. Yes, the conversation will come up. Managers know how to hire. Well, do they? Do they know how to hire strategically? Do they know how to see the big picture? Do they know, is that what we're paying them to do? Are we paying them to be a hiring manager? Or are we paying them to be a business manager operating a function of the business? And so we need to have more confidence in HR and talent acquisition that our position is relevant to the business and we have a voice. And so those are and then my mantra is to live by a couple of them. Don't ask permission, ask forgiveness. Unless the organization is a permission-based only business, then again, I'm sharpening my resume for the next opportunity. And then the answer is always no if you don't ask. And so that is one I've practiced with my kids, raising them forever. But and I use that one probably on a daily basis in my career when I'm thinking about, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that, or maybe I shouldn't do that. And then the answer to that is, well, it will be no, because I didn't take the step forward. So how do I change that, and how do I pivot that in my career? And I think those are the things that we need to see our HR and our TA leaders embrace in order to be transformational.
And I love those examples, but I would say confidence is what underpins them all. Mm-hmm. So what advice do you have, other than fake it until you make it, for those leaders that are in the situation, or those people earlier in their careers that would love to have that confidence, but they don't feel they've earned it yet? They don't have that breadth that often just generates it for you. What can they do to build that confidence?
Yeah, it is no risk, no reward. There's got to be a point in time in a pivot where you just take that step forward. Ideally, it's in a safe space where somebody's going to celebrate the step forward. It's a lot harder when it comes from a negative space and you need to take a second step. But God, there's so many different things, because I suffer from imposter syndrome as well. As many of us do. Unfortunately, we shouldn't need to, but we do. And I think it just boils down to having enough people around you. Have that one person that you can trust, that you can brainstorm the idea with, that you can practice your pitch with, that you can deliver your thoughts and have them give you that realistic response, but ask them to give it back to you in a way that makes you move forward, not stops you. And so I think I've always had that in my career. I've always had that one or two people that I could lean on, that I could throw anything at the wall at, and they would give me the honest truth, and they would be my champion all in the same way. And so the more we can do that for each other, the more we can lift each other up in this space and be more compassionate towards each other. That's my word for the week. The better we're going to be as an industry, the easier it's going to be to take the next step.
That's some great advice. And at the end of the day, I can't think of any aspirational leader I've ever worked with or admired that hasn't failed. Yes. And at the end of the day, that's where the learning comes from. And to me, that's part of where the confidence comes from as well, because you know what? I've had some epic failures in my career. My goodness, I could fill a week's worth of podcasts just with those.
Yep.
But the reality is, once you've had that experience, you know, the world doesn't end.
Right.
At the end of the day, you got over that barrier, you can get over the next one. And so you build that confidence that way as well, I think,
Yep.
by knowing that maybe I don't have to get it right the first time, or maybe I'm going to stumble and I'm going to make mistakes, but it's okay.
It's okay. Definitely okay. Try it. But again, the answer is always no if you don't ask. So
Exactly.
Gotta get out there.
Love that. Alrighty, well, we are basically at time, if not slightly over, Elaine, and I know you are, like I said earlier, extremely busy. So I very much appreciate you coming to talk to us today and really enjoyed this conversation. I mean, I love geeking out about recruiting anyway, but always hearing other people's insights, particularly somebody who's achieved as much as you have and is really helping to drive forward more of a strategic approach. That is my geek jam, shall we say. But any final thoughts you want to leave with the audience before we let them go?
Nope. I think be curious, be courageous. Those are the things we continue to do that. AI will take away the tactical and the mind numbing stuff, and we can actually be better humans.
Love that. But all right, thank you so much, Elaine. Really appreciate you and your time. And everybody else, thank you for tuning in. We will be back next week with a couple more episodes for you, exploring all things HR, AI, and how the world of work is changing. But in the meantime, hang in there. And yeah, check out the archives for more episodes. Bye, everyone.